Hello there. This lecture is all about employee motivation and other positive psychology constructs such as job satisfaction, organizational citizenship behaviors, and employee engagement. So, once the employer has selected qualified applicants and provided adequate onboarding and training, it's really important to maintain the high level of productivity that was emphasized in training, even after training is over. One very important aspect of employee performance is the motivation to exert effort and strive for excellence. And motivation is really, it's a force that serves three functions. So it energizes or causes people to act. It also directs behavior toward the attainment of specific goals. And motivation sustains the effort expended in reaching those goals. Now, the causes of motivation cannot be observed directly, so it's very difficult to study. Researchers can only make educated guesses about motives through observation or by using some psychological measurement technique like surveys. Early motivation theorists suggested that employees are motivated by money and material gains or through interpersonal influence of other employees. But more recent theories are very sophisticated and strive to highlight the complex nature of employee motivation and all the variables that interact to motivate employees. The bulk of this lecture is focused on the various theories of motivation, and many of the theories of motivation involve internal processes or cognitive and need-based aspects of motivation. Some theories are more behavior-based and are focused on how a motivator, usually an authority figure or some sort of external reward, can do things to change employee behavior or maintain it. Now, my favorite theories are based on job design, which focus on how various characteristics of employee tasks and work environments can have a positive influence on employee motivation. The reason I like those job design theories is because those are some things that can be changed about the work environment, or they lend themselves well to interventions that can increase employee motivation. Now, the bulk of motivation theories suggest that motivated employees are high performers, but it's also important to consider other factors that have an impact on performance other than motivation. So I will briefly describe some of these factors to emphasize that performance is not solely based on motivation. And then finally, I will talk about some other positive employee attitudes and behaviors because it's not just a motivation that is helping employees perform better, but it's also these other constructs like job satisfaction, self-efficacy, employee engagement, organizational commitment, and organizational citizenship behaviors. There are several motivation theories that suggest that people have certain needs that are important in determining motivation. Needs involve specific psychological or physiological deficiencies that humans are naturally driven to satisfy. Need-based theories of motivation propose that motivation is the interaction among various needs and the drives to satisfy those needs. Now, many of you psychology students out there have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs just suggests that human beings have needs that are hierarchically ranked, like a pyramid that you see on the screen. And it's starting at the bottom or the most basic level of needs and working all the way up to the top or self-actualization. So there are some needs that are basic to all human beings. And in their absence, nothing else matters, right? So as we satisfy these basic or lower level needs, we start looking to satisfy higher order needs. And according to Maslow, once a lower level need is satisfied, it no longer serves as a motivator, and then you move up the pyramid. So the foundation of human needs are physiological in nature, so air, food, water, shelter, really just basic survival. Now, once people have their most basic needs met, the need for physical safety or shelter is very important for the avoidance of danger, pain, or an uncertain future. Now, according to Maslow, once people are able to survive and feel safe, social needs are important, or the need to be accepted by others, the need for love, affection, and friendship. Then, moving up the pyramid, once a person feels they have a certain level of social belonging, the need for self-esteem becomes very important. So people have a need to be recognized for accomplishments and to be admired and respected by their peers. Once somebody reaches high self-esteem, then it's time to strive for self-actualization. And self-actualization just represents the highest level of human functioning. And according to Abraham Maslow, self-actualization refers to reaching your highest potential and attaining a very deep sense of fulfillment. Now, because higher order needs are unlikely to be satisfied in the typical employee and through the workplace, there's a constant upward striving that explains why, for example, even successful high level executives continue to exhibit considerable motivation. The executives are no longer motivated by money to provide for basic survival needs, but a need for esteem, recognition, or personal growth drives that motivation. Although this theory has received a great deal of attention from professionals in psychology, business, and other areas, this theory has not really led to any type of useful application or strategy for improving work motivation. Researchers have largely failed to support the predictions made based on this theory of need-driven behavior in the workplace. But it's still a good starting point for a psychological theory that will help understand how people become their best self. Another popular need-based theory of employee motivation comes from David McClelland's achievement motivation theory. This theory suggests that different people are motivated by different aspects of what work has to offer. So whereas Maslow's hierarchy assumes that everybody progresses through needs in the same order, David McClelland suggests that there are individual differences in which needs are most paramount or important to them. So there are three major categories of needs and desires that have the potential to be satisfied by work. So there's the need for achievement, the need for power, and the need for affiliation or social connection. And according to McClelland, we all possess more or less of each of these motives, although a particular need or set of needs tends to predominate or be more powerful for each individual. So the need for achievement is motivated by the joy of just doing a good job, especially in challenging but manageable circumstances. So those with a high need for achievement desire praise and regular feedback about their performance. The majority of research on achievement motivation theory has focused on the need for achievement, and evidence indicates that individuals with a high need for achievement attain personal success in their jobs, but only if the type of work that they do fosters that personal achievement. So there must be a match between the types of outcome a particular job offers and the specific motivational needs of the person. For example, people who have a great need for achievement might do best in a job in which they're allowed to solve problems, such as a scientist or engineer, or in jobs where there is a direct relation between personal efforts and successful job outcomes, like a salesperson working on commission. In fact, high achievers tend to make more money than those with a low need for achievement. Also, employees with a high need for achievement are typically less effective in team situations and have a tendency to try to accomplish goals by themselves rather than delegate to others or work with them as a unit. Perhaps this is why many high achieving college students prefer individual over group projects and assignments. Now, moving on to the need for power. So the need for power is really motivated by status and the potential to be influential and have control over others. The need for power is really related to a desire for opportunities for advancement, and people with a high need for power thrive in jobs that satisfy their needs to be in charge or in control, having power, right? Third need is the need for affiliation, and the need for affiliation is motivated by the desire to be liked and accepted by others. People with a high need for affiliation desire team-based projects and positive interactions with fellow employees, and they enjoy getting gratitude from team members. So there's this thing called the thematic apperception test, or the TAT, and this is what's primarily used to assess individual motivational needs. So McClelland used a variation of the TAT where respondents are instructed to study each of a series of fairly ambiguous pictures for a few moments and then write a story based on the photo. So at the bottom left of the slide there, you'll see an example of a photo that would be shown in a thematic apperception test. And you can click on the link below to see a really neat video that shows how this goes, how this plays out. So they look at these they look at these different pictures, and then they tell these brief stories. And these stories are scored using a standardized procedure that measures the presence of the three basic needs. And this is used to obtain a motivational profile for each respondent. Now, the TAT is a projected test, and that respondents project their motivations and needs into the content of the story that they create. And meta-analysis actually shows that the TAT is a reasonably good measurement tool. But it's important to note that there are alternative self-report measures of motives, and that these measures also do a pretty good job of assessing basic underlying motivational needs without the need to have a researcher sit down and record different stories and take notes on what those stories entail. Now, this theory, this achievement motivation theory, has several applications in work settings. And one way to use this theory is to develop a program that matches employees' motivational profiles to the requirements of particular jobs. So employers should really try to place individuals in positions that will best allow them to fulfill their predominant needs. So, if a job requires a strong need for achievement, employers can foster this need by developing an achievement training program in which individuals are taught to be more achievement oriented by role playing achievement oriented actions and strategies, and developing plans for setting achievement related goals. So, trying to artificially create that need for achievement in the job. Whereas need based theories are more focused on innate, uncontrolled types of needs, cognitive theories of motivation really see employees as rational human beings who cognitively or psychologically assess personal costs and benefits before taking action. It's not just a gut response like the need-based theories tend to be. The equity theory of motivation proposes that a person's motivation and corresponding level of effort is based on perceptions of fairness regarding the distribution of resources, especially for employees with a strong desire for performance-based rewards. So in the workplace, employees will compare their level of input or effort, like sales, experience, motivation, and education. They compare those inputs with the outcomes or outputs associated with their input. So like pay, job security, benefits, and promotion opportunities. Now this ratio of input to output is compared to somebody called a comparison other. So, for example, coworkers, employees at other organizations with comparable jobs, or their own past level of input and compensation. If employees perceive that they are receiving fair treatment, their motivation to work will be maintained, and steady performance can be expected. But according to equity theory, if employees feel that there is not an equitable treatment, then their motivation will be channeled into some strategy that will try to reduce this inequity. So there's different types of inequity. Underpayment inequity occurs when an individual perceives that they're getting less for their inputs than what they deserve. So they feel like, hey, I'm putting in more effort than my coworker, the comparison other, yet they earn equal or more compensation, so it seems unfair. Now this underpayment inequity can cause feelings of distress and tension, and can result in cognitive adjustment. So maybe the employee will justify their lower income or start comparing themselves to someone who makes less for equal work. Or people who are experiencing underpayment inequity could have some sort of behavioral adjustment. So instead of changing the way they think about their compensation, they will change their behaviors by either decreasing productivity, finding a new job, maybe asking for a pay increase, or stealing and maybe just withdrawing from the job in general. Now, overpayment inequity is a little more rare, but it occurs when an individual perceives that they are getting more than their fair amount of compensation based on their inputs or their effort. So somebody feeling like, hey, I'm being paid way too much considering the nature of my job and my performance compared to the work and compensation of a coworker. Now, overpayment inequity can cause feelings of guilt and can result in cognitive adjustment, just like underpayment inequity. But with cognitive adjustment for overpayment inequity, employees may distort the situation to justify their higher income, or maybe compare themselves to someone who makes more for equal work so they don't feel guilty anymore. Behavioral adjustment for overpayment inequity would be, working harder to balance that input outcome ratio, or highly unlikely, asking for a pay decrease, that's probably not going to happen, or maybe encouraging the comparison other to ask for a raise so that they no longer feel like they're getting more than other people and more that they deserve. Now, although most of the research on equity theory has used pay as the primary outcome of the job, other types of rewards have been examined. So, for example, one study found that employees would increase effort in response to receiving a high status job title. The high status title did not include a pay raise, but for this to work, the employees had to perceive that the prestigious job title was actually earned. So those employees who felt that they did not earn the prestigious title experienced feelings of overpayment and equity. Now, although equity theory has been well researched, the majority of studies have been conducted in labs. So really, it's often too costly or confusing to randomly assign real employees in your organization to different conditions where they receive either too little or too much reward, right? It's hard to do a true experiment to test equity theory. Researchers have also examined the role of individual differences as moderators of equity-based outcomes. So equity sensitivity is an important individual difference to consider because some individuals vary in their concern over the equity of input-outcome or effort-reward ratios. So those who are quite sensitive to this balance between effort and rewards, they will be more impacted by perceived inequity than those who really don't care so much about the fairness of rewards and recognition. So it's important to consider that this theory may apply differently to different people. It's also been suggested that there are cultural differences and that those can impact equity theory. So for example, there may be cultural differences in how people evaluate inputs and outputs and which people they choose to compare themselves to. The next cognitive theory of motivation that I want to introduce you to is called expectancy theory. Like equity theory, expectancy theory assumes that employees are rational, decision-making people whose behavior is guided by a cost-benefit analysis for any particular course of action. So Victor Vroom came up with expectancy theory, and expectancy theory suggests that individual motivation to put forth more or less effort is determined by a rational calculation of expectancy times instrumentality times valence. And I'll explain each of those concepts individually. So the concept of expectancy. So employees will ask themselves, will my effort lead to high performance? So employees who are unaware of performance standards or have a lack of training and resources may not really expect a connection between effort and performance because they don't really know what they're doing. The second piece of expectancy theory is instrumentality. So the employee will ask themselves, will my performance actually lead to some sort of outcome? So the first step in influencing instrumentality is to connect pay and other incentives to performance. Low instrumentality may be due to employees feeling that something other than performance, like favoritism or politics, leads to rewards. Valence is the third concept of expectancy theory, and that's just when employees are asking themselves, are these outcomes actually desirable? So to influence valence, managers would need to find out what their employees value. And this can be done by talking to employees or surveying them about rewards that they find valuable. So in the workplace, expectancy theory outcomes include money, promotions, assignment to special work projects, even avoiding punishment from your supervisor, or receiving positive feedback from your supervisor. Those are all outcomes of interest for expectancy theory. So for example, if an employee's goal is to avoid her supervisor's criticism, which is negatively valent, she might consider her expectations or expectancy, right? So can I perform the job flawlessly to avoid my supervisor's displeasure? And that employee will also consider instrumentality. So even if I do an error-free job, will my supervisor still criticize my work? If the supervisor is someone who never believes an employee's performance is good enough, then it's unlikely that the employee will be motivated to avoid being punished by them. So, according to expectancy theory, employees must be confident that they can perform well, that performance will be rewarded, and they must actually desire or care about the reward that's at stake. All three of these conditions must be met for maximum motivation. And if you see that calculation, right, the instrumentality, expectancy, valence calculation, that suggests that if any of these conditions are not met, employees will not be motivated. So, for example, my dad was a really good welder and he had really high performance and he did better than most of the other welders at his company. So, he had high expectancy, right? He knew he was good at his job. All he wanted was the opportunity to work on more exciting projects. So, this is a high valence, right? He really wanted this outcome of more desirable projects. But unfortunately, he was constantly watching less capable welders get assigned to better projects. That would be low instrumentality, right? So he worked for a company that focused on politics and favoritism over performance. And over time, his performance started to decline because he realized that no matter how hard he worked, he was not going to be assigned those more desirable projects. So, expectancy theory continues to be a popular cognitive model for understanding work motivation. And although there's no single agreed upon strategy for its application, it does lead to many practical suggestions for guiding managers and leaders in attempts to motivate workers. So, for example, the manager should clearly define work outcomes or potential rewards and costs associated with performance. All employees should receive training on best practices. That way, they know how to be high performers. Now, this relationship between performance and rewards should also be made very clear. Employees need to know that if they achieve a certain performance goal, then rewards will follow. And witnessing high performing employees receiving desirable rewards will help improve instrumentality perceptions among employees. Now, performance related goals should also be attainable and within reach of the employees involved, because unreasonable goals will just frustrate employees, not motivate them. So, expectancy theory lends itself to some serious practical applications of how to motivate employees. Now, let's move on to behavior based theories of motivation. Behavior based theories of motivation focus on external control of employee behaviors that are critical to employee motivation. Behavioral psychologists emphasize that learning is the basis for pretty much all behavior. Learning is not only the process of gaining knowledge, but also responsible for the acquisition of attitudes, values, and even emotional responses. Now, Ivan Pavlov of, dog fame, right? Pavlov's dogs. He was a really extremely influential behavior psychologist who focused his work on classical conditioning, which suggests that learning is simply a long chain of conditioned or learned reflexes. The steps to classical conditioning rely on the process of forming associations between behaviors and rewards, then eventually removing the reward in hopes that the desired behavior continues. So, the first step in classical conditioning is to identify a natural stimulus that impacts the desired behavior. So, for example, food has an impact on salivation. A stomach virus has an impact on nausea. Perfume with pheromones has an impact on desire. So identifying the natural stimulus that impacts the desired behavior, be it salivation, nausea, or desire. Then the second step is you pair a desired unnatural or conditional stimulus or the desired trigger of behavior with the natural stimulus to impact behavior. So for example, if you eat a bunch of seafood and you end up with a stomach virus, then the stomach virus is associated with seafood. Or if you wear perfume with pheromones when you're with your love interest, right? You're pairing perfume with you in hopes that your love interest will be more desiring of you. Then the conditioned stimulus becomes associated with the natural stimulus to create a new conditioned response. So for example, if you're nauseated by the smell or thought of seafood without having a stomach virus, or maybe your love interest may start to associate you with desire without the need for perfume. So like Pavlov, B.F. Skinner was also an extremely influential behavioral psychologist who focused his work on operant conditioning. And the work of Skinner was rooted in a view that classical conditioning was just far too simplistic to be a complete explanation of complex human behavior. B.F. Skinner suggests that learning is not simply a reflex, as classical conditioning suggests. So Skinner believed that the best way to understand behavior is to look at the causes of an action and its consequences. Skinner's view of operant conditioning suggested that learned behavior is based on enforcing or rewarding and punishing behavior based on the consequences it produces. So reinforcement is used to increase the probability that behavior will occur in the future, whereas punishment aims to decrease the probability that some behavior will occur. So factors like attention, praise, approval, success, and money are major reinforcers for humans, and Skinner believed that reinforcement operates either positively or negatively. So positive reinforcement strengthens a behavior by providing a consequence an individual finds rewarding. So for example, if a professor gave students $20 each time they asked or answered a question in class, that would be the reward, then they would be more likely to participate in class, thus strengthening the behavior, right? Positive reinforcement. Now, negative reinforcement also strengthens the behavior, but it strengthens the behavior because it stops or removes an unpleasant experience. So, for example, if students did not participate in class, they would have to give their professor $20. So students would participate to avoid paying $20, thus, again, strengthening the behavior. But instead of like positive reinforcement, where they're strengthening the behavior because they want desired outcomes, negative reinforcement, the behavior is strengthened because they're trying to avoid negative outcomes. Now, punishment is defined as the opposite of reinforcement, since punishment is designed to weaken or eliminate a response or behaviors rather than increase it like reinforcement does. So punishment is an aversive event that decreases the behavior that it follows. So for example, students pay the professor $20 each time they interrupt or act rude in class. The goal is that the professor wants the student to stop being disrespectful. They want to put an end to that behavior through punishment. Now, admittedly, it's not always easy to distinguish between punishment and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is an event that occurs after a response or a behavior and strengthens the response. But both negative reinforcement and punishment lead to avoidance of an unpleasant situation. Now, there are many problems with using punishment that do not result from negative reinforcement, such as punished behavior does not become extinct, it's often suppressed behavior. And typically, it returns when the punishment is no longer present. Punishment also can cause increased aggression, whereas negative reinforcement doesn't. Punishment also can create fear that can generalize to undesirable behaviors, like a fear of school or a fear of going to work. And punishment does not necessarily guide people toward desired behavior, whereas reinforcement tells you what to do, punishment only tells you what not to do. So if you want to learn more about classical conditioning and operant conditioning, you can click the links where it says the underlined classical conditioning and operant conditioning to see some videos that show some of the foundational experiments that led to these theories. Now I want to focus a little bit more on operant conditioning. I'm not really going to emphasize classical conditioning because it's pretty basic and the applications to the workplace are not very good. They're not really there. So let's look at operant conditioning and reinforcement schedules that can be related to how employees are rewarded in the workplace. So within operant conditioning, there is a great deal of attention given to these schedules of reinforcement and their effects on establishing and maintaining behavior. So behaviorists discovered that different patterns or schedules of reinforcement had different effects on the speed of learning and on extinction or discontinuing the behavior or giving up. So when I say extinction, remember discontinuing the behavior or stopping the behavior or just giving up. So Skinner's research on rats, and if you watch the video in the previous slide, you would understand more about his research on rats. But his research suggests that continuous reinforcement has a relatively low impact on effort from the person or the animal being reinforced, and has the quickest rate of extinction. Conversely, his research suggests that people and animals will continue desired behavior for the longest period of time when reinforcement is given after a random number of behaviors or a variable ratio schedule. The behavior is very hard to extinguish because of this unpredictability. So let me talk about each one of these types of schedules. So a simple schedule is the continuous reinforcement, where every desired response or behavior is followed by a reward. So for example, for continuous reinforcement, every time an employee sells a warranty, they receive a $5 bonus, right? Now, continuous schedules have a low impact on effort. Again, desired behaviors last a very short period of time as well. So, low impact on effort, those desired behaviors don't really last. Now, these more complex schedules involve intermittent reinforcement, which involves applying the reinforcer after fixed or variable intervals. So fixed ratio reinforcement. This is when behavior is reinforced only after the behavior occurs a specified number of times. So when reinforcement is given after every so many correct responses. So for example, every time an employee sells 5 warranties, they receive a $25 bonus. It's not happening after each warranty like continuous, but after a set number of warranties. Now, fixed ratio schedules tend to have a strong impact on effort, and desired behaviors last for a little while. Now moving on to fixed interval reinforcement. This is really common in the workplace. So this is once reinforcement is given after a fixed interval, right? So after a fixed period of time, a reward or reinforcement is given. And it requires at least one correct response or example of performance being made. So for example, being paid by the hour. That's fixed interval reinforcement. You get paid for each period of time you're on the job. Now, fixed interval reinforcement has a moderate impact on effort, and the desired behaviors last for a little while. Now remember earlier I mentioned that variable ratio reinforcement is probably the most powerful type because of the unpredictability. And variable ratio reinforcement is when behavior is reinforced after an unpredictable number of times. So for example, sales, right? You pitch to many and you sell to some. You don't know how much time it's going to take for you to get that sale. Also gambling or fishing, right? You don't know how many times you're going to have to do something before you get the outcome of interest. Now, variable ratio reinforcement has a strong impact on effort, and desired behaviors last for a really long time. So you can see why gambling is problematic for people. Now, variable interval reinforcement is when reinforcement is given after an unpredictable amount of time has passed. So for example, a self-employed person being paid at unpredictable times or getting a return on investment at an undetermined time. Now, with variable interval reinforcement, this has a really strong impact on effort, and the desired behaviors last for a pretty long time, but not quite as long as variable ratio reinforcement. So a major limitation to operant conditioning and reinforcement theory in general is that it emphasizes external or extrinsic rewards. Operant conditioning or reinforcement theory fails to recognize that people are often motivated by internal or intrinsic motivation. So Deci and Ryan's extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation theory suggests that employee motivation comes from within and from external rewards. So intrinsic motivation is really just internally focused rewards that stem from a sense of accomplishment and an opportunity to be creative and in control of solving optimally challenging tasks. So for example, having the ability to come up with a solution to a problem that saves money for your company makes you feel proud of yourself, regardless of any external reward. Now, according to this theory, employees can be motivated by challenges at work, with the reward simply being the satisfaction of meeting the challenge for the job well done. Students who take classes to learn and not simply earn a grade, or employees who love their work because of its challenging nature and the opportunity to develop their skills and abilities, are intrinsically motivated. So intrinsic rewards are based on an employee's sense of accomplishment and competence at performing and mastering work-related tasks. And intrinsic needs will result in self-motivation and effective functioning because they result in the internalization of organizational values and personal growth and development. So individuals with a high level of intrinsic motivation will really thrive when they are given a sense of autonomy or control over their own work. They don't need to be micromanaged because they are ready to go. They are intrinsically motivated for their own reasons. Now, extrinsic motivation, the focus of the operant conditioning theory of motivation, is really based on externally focused rewards that are provided for high levels of performance, like merit pay and job security. It's extrinsic motivators like money can actually undermine intrinsic motivation and demotivate employees who are already highly intrinsically motivated to perform well. So sometimes organizations can overemphasize extrinsic rewards to the detriment of intrinsic motivation. So think about it. If you keep throwing money at an employee who is already intrinsically motivated, they may become reliant on that money to stay motivated and will no longer be intrinsically motivated if that financial reward disappears. So employers need to be really careful about extrinsic motivation and make sure that they're providing just enough to keep that high level of intrinsic motivation present in their employees without undermining it. So, whereas the need based theory of achievement motivation emphasized the role of individual differences in certain types of needs and how those needs determine work and the motivation of employees, and the behavior based theories focus on behavioral outcomes as the key to motivation, the job design theories, which is Herzberg's two-factor theory and the job characteristics model, really stress the structure and design of jobs as key factors in motivating employees. So these theories suggest that if jobs are well designed, containing all the elements that employees require from their jobs to satisfy physical and psychological needs, then employees will be motivated. So it's related to behavioral and need-based theories, but it's a stronger emphasis on how the characteristics of the job itself impact motivation. So Herzberg's two-factor theory of motivation emphasizes the role of job satisfaction in determining employee motivation. Herzberg stated that the traditional single-dimensional approach to job satisfaction, with its continuum ranging from, job dissatisfaction all the way to being very, very satisfied, Herzberg suggested this continuum approach is wrong and that job satisfaction and job dissatisfaction are actually two separate and independent constructs. Now, initially, Herzberg's theory was based on survey responses among white-collar professional workers who were asked to describe what made them feel especially good or bad about their jobs. And what Herzberg found was that the factors clustered into one of two categories. So certain factors, when present, seem to cause job satisfaction, and Herzberg labeled these motivators. Other factors, when absent, tended to cause job dissatisfaction, and Herzberg called these hygienes. So you'll see the bottom flow chart there, you'll see motivators and hygienes. So motivators are factors that are related to job content. They're inherent in the work itself. It's the type of work, the level of responsibility associated with the job, and the chances for recognition, advancement, and personal achievement are all considered motivators that would lead to job satisfaction if they are present. Hygienes, on the other hand, are related to the context in which people perform their jobs. So common hygienes include benefits, physical working conditions, social working conditions, the type of supervision, base salary, and company policies. Now, Herzberg's theory indicates that if hygienes are not present, this would relate to job dissatisfaction. Herzberg theory also indicates that if managers are able to keep employees happy and motivated, two things must be done. First, to eliminate job dissatisfaction, again, employees must be provided with basic hygiene factors. Or in other words, managers must make sure employees are compensated appropriately, treated fairly, and provided with job security. However, providing these hygiene factors will only prevent dissatisfaction. According to Herzberg, providing these hygiene factors will not necessarily motivate employees and relate to job satisfaction. So to get employers to put a greater effort and energy into these jobs, motivators must be present. The work must be important, give the employee a sense of responsibility, and should provide chances for recognition and upward mobility. Now, many psychologists are critical of Herzberg's two-factor theory, and subsequent research after the research he did with white-collar workers didn't really replicate the presence of two distinct factors that Herzberg found among white-collar workers. It's also difficult to distinguish between hygienes and motivators, right? So for example, salary, which should be hygiene because it's external to the work itself, may sometimes act as a motivator because money can be used to recognize outstanding employees and indicate an individual's status in the organization. So this is a unique theory that suggests that job satisfaction is not on a continuum. There's some things that lead to being more satisfied, some things that lead to being not satisfied, and that those two things should be examined separately. Now here's my favorite model. I don't know if it's because I like complicated flowcharts or because I love this because, the core dimensions of the job characteristics model can be directly controlled by supervisors and employers. So this has the most practically applicable types of guidance for managers and employees. So this is Hackman and Oldham's job characteristics model. And this suggests that the characteristics of the job have an effect on how employees think and feel on the job, which then results in motivation and performance. So let's break down all these core dimensions. So skill variety, that just refers to the degree to which a job requires the employee to use a variety of their abilities and skills to perform work-related tasks. So a job that demands a range of skills is likely to be perceived as challenging and meaningful. So that's the psychological state that results from skill variety. Task identity refers to the degree to which a job requires the completion of an entire job or function, and the employee gets to see the observable outcome or product of their work efforts. So seeing a task all the way through to completion instead of just doing like an assembly line little piece of it, right? You get to see the whole entire process unfold. That also relates to feeling that your work is meaningful because you're seeing the finished product. Task significance is the degree to which a job has a substantial impact on other people within the organization, such as coworkers or persons outside the organization, like customers. There's a body of research examining core versus peripheral jobs, and this really gets at task significance. So core jobs are essential to the mission of the organization, whereas peripheral jobs are designed to support those with the core jobs. And research suggests that those in peripheral jobs have more negative attitudes, perceptions, and behaviors than individuals whose job is central to the organization, or those with core jobs who can directly see the meaningfulness of their work and how important they are to the organization or how significant their tasks are. Now let's move down to autonomy. Autonomy is simply the degree to which a job gives the employee freedom and independence to choose how to schedule and carry out the necessary tasks associated with their job. So if you treat employees like adults who can handle their own business and you don't micromanage them and you let them figure out their own way to perform their work, they're going to take on personal responsibility for those outcomes and be more motivated. Now, feedback is pretty straightforward, right? It's the degree to which the job allows the employee to receive direct and clear information about the effectiveness of their performance. So if you're not giving somebody feedback, they aren't really sure how well they're performing and they don't have the knowledge of the results of their work. And that can lead to decrements in performance and motivation. So skill variety, task identity, and task significance, again, all impact the experience of meaningfulness in work. Whereas autonomy influences employees' sense of responsibility associated with the job and work outcomes, and then feedback influences the employee's knowledge of the impact of their work and how well they are performing. So to summarize the basic job characteristics model, the 5 core job characteristics influence the 3 critical psychological states of meaningfulness, responsibility, and knowledge of results. And then these psychological states then lead to motivation and certain work outcomes, such as the motivation to work, improve performance, and develop job-related skills. So it's the external environment influencing internal states, which then impact behaviors and performance. So the job characteristics model has a nifty little formula that helps you understand how the core dimensions impact motivation. So according to the job characteristics model, a job only has motivating potential, that's what MP stands for, if all psychological states are achieved at some level. And the motivating potential is directly determined by the core dimensions of the job. So skill variety plus task identity plus task significance Take that and average it, multiply that by autonomy, and then feedback. And as I've mentioned before, these are not something that automatically has a number assigned to it, right? A lot of constructs in psychology are more internal characteristics or things that aren't necessarily numeric in nature. So to do this formula, you would have to develop some sort of metric to assess all these core dimensions. So for example, if we measured all core dimensions on a scale from 0 to 10, your minimum motivation potential would be 0, right? Because if any of those is 0, it's going to be 0. Then your maximum would be 10 times 10 times 10, or 1,000 would be the maximum score if you were measuring these different core dimensions on a scale from 0, not at all, to 10, always. So Hackman used this formula to show that motivation is not a simple combination of the 5 job characteristics. In the formula, autonomy, task identity, and task significance are averaged, which means that jobs can have low levels of 1 or 2 of these characteristics, which are compensated for by a high score on the third, and then the average score is then multiplied by those core characteristics of autonomy and feedback. However, think about the formula, right? If any of the levels of autonomy, feedback, or skill variety plus task significance are 0, then your motivating potential will not be there. So for jobs to have any motivating potential, it must have both autonomy and feedback and at least one of the other 3 characteristics. So for example, see the values presented below, right? So let's say that a data analysis works from home and has the opportunity to use many of their skills and abilities for their statistical analysis work assignments. So they have high skill variety. However, they really never get to see the final report based on their analysis or witness the decisions that are made based on their reports. So they have no task identity. The data analyst is also working from home and has no idea how significant their work is to the success of projects they are involved with. So they have no task significance. But that's okay. At least they have skill variety, right? So that makes up for the lack of task identity and task significance. Now, although the data analyst has specific guidelines associated with their job, they are free to accomplish their work tasks as they please. They're working from home, they have their own timeline, and as long as it's reasonable, they are able to do work as they see fit. So the data analyst has high autonomy. Unfortunately, the data analyst receives very little feedback on their work from their supervisor and is unsure how well received their data analyses are by the rest of the work team. So they're receiving no feedback. So if you look at the calculations on the slide, the data analyst's high level of skill variety and autonomy are canceled out by the lack of task identity, task significance, and feedback. So this data analyst would not be very motivated. If you're interested in seeing the original paper about the job characteristics model and the items used to measure the score dimensions, I included the original article in the module for this week, so you can check it out. It's pretty old school, but if you go to the end, you'll see how these different core dimensions are operationalized through survey scales. So it's pretty interesting stuff. So much like the achievement motivation theory, it's important to note that this model depends on individual differences. And these individual differences act as moderators of the relationship between the variables in the model. Now, the most relevant individual difference, and there are tons, but I'm going to talk about the most relevant one, which is called growth needs strength, or an individual employee's desire for personal development and improvement on the job. So, some employees desire jobs that are challenging, require a great deal of responsibility, jobs that are demanding, jobs that require a lot from them. But some employees don't require that. They don't desire that. So according to the job characteristics model, improving the dimensions of the 5 core job characteristics should have motivating effects only on those employees with high growth need strength. Because employees with very low growth need strength are not likely to be motivated by jobs that offer opportunities for responsibility, autonomy, and accountability. So the power of this model depends on individual differences like growth needs strength, and the power of this model also depends on actually having the adequate skills and knowledge and satisfaction with its extrinsic rewards. So it doesn't matter if these core dimensions are present if employees don't have adequate skills to reach the outcomes in the model. So one problem with the job characteristics model is that we cannot be sure of the direction of causality. So you have to ask yourself, is it the presence of motivating job characteristics that cause job satisfaction and motivation, as the job characteristics model predicts? Or is it the case that maybe employees who are more motivated and satisfied see their jobs as being rich in these key job characteristics? So some researchers have criticized the use of self-report measures as well, not only the direction of causality, but using self-report survey measures of job characteristics. And some researchers advocate instead using a job analysis to determine the core dimensions of the job instead of just asking people if those core dimensions are present. And that helps eliminate the problem of causal inference, right? You know which one came first if you're basing the core dimensions on the actual characteristics of the job and not employee perceptions of those core dimensions. So as I mentioned before, the job characteristics model is very applicable to the workplace, and so is Herzberg's two-factor theory. These have both led to the development and refinement of a strategy used to motivate employees through job redesign or job enrichment. So this intervention strategy, or job enrichment, involves redesigning jobs to give employees greater responsibility in the planning, execution, and evaluation of their work. So with job enrichment, employees may actually take on some of the tasks that were previously performed by higher level supervisors, such as allocating work tasks, appraising their own work performance, setting goals for the organization, and making their own personnel decisions like hiring and giving raises. These job enrichment programs typically include increasing the level of responsibility associated with jobs, as well as the employee's sense of freedom and independence or autonomy. So it also includes allowing employees to complete an entire task or function whenever possible to increase task identity. Also, providing detailed feedback so employees can learn to improve their own performance. And encouraging employees to learn on the job by taking on additional, more challenging tasks that help them improve their expertise in the jobs they perform and career development. Now, job enrichment is especially useful for maintaining motivation during organizational downsizing, where motivation usually takes a crap. So instead of forcing employees to do more for less, you can use job enrichment to help them build their skills, eliminate middleman positions so that one person is seeing an entire task through to completion, right? More task identity, and keep the employees that you trust and allow them to function with autonomy and no longer need so much supervision. So you can eliminate some of the supervisory positions by keeping the employees who are intrinsically motivated and can be trusted to have autonomy in their work. Case studies suggest that job enrichment is very successful, but you must keep in mind that individual differences such as growth needs strength will determine the effectiveness of job enrichment. So now I briefly want to show you the connections among these theories, even though I've already alluded to them, and then just keep in mind that there are certain things that will inhibit employee performance regardless of motivation. So as this lecture demonstrates, there are many different theories of motivation, and I, by no stretch of the imagination, covered them all. I just covered the more popular, more common theories. So as you can imagine, motivation is a very complex process, and some elements of motivation come from within the employee, some elements of motivation are external to the person, some involve rational, cognitive decision making, and some elements of motivation are more emotional in nature. So in reviewing the various motivation theories, it's important to examine the ways in which the theories are similar and how they are different. And I'm not going to go over everything in this slide. I just wanted to provide you a nice succinct summary of all the theories that I covered. So just to compare and contrast, right? So early need theories of motivation are primarily descriptive models that explain how people's motivation is rooted in different levels of inherent or instinctual needs. However, reinforcement theory focuses on the role of the environment or external factors that draw out a person's motivation. So need theories can be viewed as the push from within, whereas reinforcement theories, like operant conditioning, represent the pull from the environment. So it's important to not focus on a single theory of motivation, but to have a more holistic approach to all the different aspects that motivate employees. Now, similar connections can be made between the behavior-based theories of motivation and the need-based theories. So, for example, the notion of intrinsic rewards suggests that employees have a high need for achievement. So, two things that are very similar coming from different theories. Finally, although the job characteristics model is focused on the work environment, this theory recognizes the importance of how employees think and feel about their work environment, much like the cognitive theories. The job characteristics model also considers individual differences as moderators of the relationships between the variables in the model. So, for example, growth needs strength is closely related to the different types of motivation outlined in achievement motivation theory. So, it's important to see these connections and how understanding all these theories can help employers better motivate their employees. So, as you can imagine, the main reason employers care so much about motivation is because it's believed to have a direct link to good work performance. In other words, it's assumed that a motivated employee is a productive employee. However, it's important to consider factors other than employee motivation that likely have an impact on employee performance. So, certain things about the organization that will inhibit performance no matter how motivated that employee is. So, again, having highly motivated employees is not an automatic predictor of high levels of performance. If a performance problem presents itself, employers should avoid automatically assuming that employee motivation is the problem. Employers should conduct a detailed assessment of all the other variables happening in the work environment that could have an impact on performance and productivity. So, regardless of the level of employee motivation, if employees are forced to work under vague or conflicting policies or have inadequate tools and equipment, productivity and performance will certainly suffer. Poor policies and equipment impact performance independent of employee motivation. It's also important to consider individual differences other than employee motivation. For example, lacking the basic talent or skills to get the job done will have a negative impact on productivity even among the most motivated employees. So think about new employees, right? They're probably the most motivated, but also the least productive because they have not yet gained the skills to perform their job well. So sometimes something that maybe on the surface looks like a motivational problem is actual a problem of individual abilities. So this is why employee selection, training, and placement is extremely important because you want to be able to harness those motivated employees' skills as quickly as possible. Now, it's also important to consider group dynamics when examining performance problems. Most employees are part of a larger unit, and for that unit to be efficient and productive, individual efforts must be coordinated. Although most members may be highly motivated, corporate entities often have, one or two key members, and if those key members are not good team players, then the motivation of the entire group suffers. So it's important to consider other factors than employee motivation that lead to performance and minimize those as much as possible so that if you're following these theories of motivation to help employees be more productive, your interventions will actually have the desired effect. Now, although this is technically an employee motivation lecture, employee motivation is directly tied to several positive employee attitudes and perceptions. So it's important to note that there are other employee characteristics other than motivation that are strongly related to performance at work. So my intention for this section is not to give you an exhaustive overview of all the employee attitudes and perceptions that are measured in IO psychology. I simply want to provide a brief overview of popular constructs dealing with positive employee attitudes and perceptions that you'll probably be seeing in journal articles this semester. So I've already discussed job satisfaction when we were looking at the two-factor theory of employee motivation. But Herzberg's two-factor theory and the job characteristics model are really as much about theories of job satisfaction as they are motivation. So both theories emphasize that satisfaction with the job is a key to determining motivation, or in other words, a happy worker is a productive worker. Now, job satisfaction simply consists of the feelings and attitudes that one has about their job. All aspects of a particular job, be it good or bad, positive or negative, are likely to contribute to the development of feelings of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. Now, there are two major approaches to conceptualizing job satisfaction, and both of these approaches assume that job satisfaction is on a continuum, so not agreeing with that two-factor model. So, one way to conceptualize job satisfaction is the global approach, which just considers overall job satisfaction. This way of looking at job satisfaction simply asks if the employee is satisfied overall using a yes or no response, a single rating scale, or a small group of items that measure general global job satisfaction. Now, the other and more popular approach to measuring job satisfaction is the facet approach, which considers job satisfaction to be composed of feelings and attitudes about a number of different elements or facets of the job. So, for example, overall satisfaction may be a composite of numerous factors like satisfaction with pay, the type of work itself, satisfaction with working conditions, the type of supervision, satisfaction with company policies and procedures, or relationships with coworkers, and maybe even opportunities for promotion and advancement. So the facet approach considers each of these aspects of job satisfaction individually and assumes that any given employee may be quite satisfied with some facets, such as the amount of pay, but unsatisfied with others, such as the quality of supervision or the opportunities for a promotion. So supporters of the facet definition of job satisfaction argue that it helps to indicate specific areas of dissatisfaction that can be targeted for improvement. And in fact, much of the psychological research on job satisfaction uses the facet approach. Because if a person's not satisfied, you want to know what they're not satisfied with. Now, although a variety of factors might contribute to job satisfaction for most employees, job satisfaction depends on the perception of employees. It is an internal characteristic. And this is because different employees may perceive the same exact job differently, and it is those individual perceptions that determine whether or not an employee is satisfied with the job. So think about achievement motivation theory and the emphasis on individual differences and what needs motivate employees in the workplace. The same types of individual differences apply to job satisfaction. So what may make one person satisfied may result in dissatisfaction for somebody else. So it's important to consider those individual differences. Another really popular construct in positive psychology is self-efficacy. Self-efficacy reflects confidence in the ability to exert control over one's own motivation, behavior, and social environment. In short, self-efficacy in the workplace, an employee's judgment about being able to perform their job. Unlike self-esteem, which reflects how employees feel about their worth or value, self-efficacy reflects how confident employees are about performing the tasks associated with their job. High self-efficacy in one area may not coincide with high self-efficacy in another area, though. So it's very task or job specific. So for example, a data analyst may be very confident in their ability to interpret results of statistical analysis, but may not feel very confident or self-efficacious when it comes to communicating those results to the general public or in social situations. So it's important to note also that having high self-efficacy does not necessarily mean that employees believe they will be successful. While self-efficacy indicates how strongly employees believe they have the skills to do well, they may believe that other factors in the organization will inhibit their potential to be successful in the workplace. So there's a growing body of research that suggests that there's a positive and significant relationship between employee self-efficacy beliefs and their performance. And similar results are found among students. So student self-efficacy tends to predict their academic performance. So as you may expect, believing in your abilities is a predictor of doing well. However, much like other theories of employee performance, the direction of causality is not certain. In other words, it may be that employees are better performers, and so those who are better performers have higher self-efficacy, instead of the other way around, where employees with higher levels of self-efficacy have better performance. Regardless, it's important to consider ways to develop self-efficacy through training and development in the workplace, because it is directly related to performance. So there's three ways that employees can develop a sense of self-efficacy. And one is through performance accomplishments, the other is modeled exposure, and then also through verbal persuasion. So let's break these three things down. So performance accomplishments, that's just prior performance, right? So being successful in the past is a very powerful source of information when developing self-efficacy expectations. So once a person attempts a behavior and execute it successfully, then they build a seemingly tangible sense of self-efficacy, and this often results in improved performance. Also, modeled exposure or vicarious learning refers to a person seeing her peers succeed at a specific task, thereby gaining confidence that they too can succeed. So, a higher degree of self efficacy encourages an individual to try new behaviors and persist until they can perform them successfully. So, when working with employees one on one, you can incorporate modeled exposure into your training. So, you can model a portion of the task and ask the learner or the trainee to practice that task. Then model the next step and ask the trainee to do the same, and so on until the trainee successfully executes the full behavior through vicarious learning. Finally, verbal persuasion can help develop self efficacy by convincing individuals that they possess the capabilities to successfully master a given activity. So, once these employees have the support of a manager, a trainer, or a trusted colleague, they're likely to summon their intrinsic efforts and persist until they succeed. You can leverage verbal persuasion within the workforce by matching a new employee with a senior mentor or designing regular team building activities that incorporate feedback. An employee's immediate supervisor is one of the most influential sources of positive feedback that can help build self efficacy. So, supervisors and managers should schedule regular coaching sessions with the employee and provide support and encouragement during these meetings. All those things should boost self efficacy, which in turn is expected to boost performance. Employee engagement is a relatively new construct that is quickly gaining momentum in IO psychology research. And employee engagement is really just a psychological state that's characterized by vigor, dedication, and absorption in one's work and organization. So, vigor refers to high levels of energy and mental resilience while working. It also refers to a willingness to invest in one's work and persistence in the face of difficulties. Dedication refers to a strong involvement in work and experiencing a sense of significance, enthusiasm, inspiration, pride, and challenge from work. Then absorption refers to being fully concentrated or being happily engrossed in work, where time passes quickly and the employee has difficulty detaching from work when they're fully absorbed. They may forget to eat, they may forget to go to the bathroom. They are just fully immersed in their work when they're experiencing engagement, specifically absorption. So, highly engaged employees are enthusiastic about their jobs, committed to their work and the organization, and it's assumed that the state of engagement leads employees to be more motivated, productive, and more likely to engage in positive work behaviors. So, it's important to note that engagement is not the same as being a workaholic. In some cases, employees feel that, work can be an addiction, right? That's workaholism. But engaged employees work hard because they like it, not because of this inner urge or addiction that they can't resist. Now, much like the job characteristics model, engagement researchers suggest that job characteristics that are more meaningful and more likely to engage employees are going to result in more engagement. Additionally, if employees feel that they are supported by their supervisors in their organization, they're more likely to experience high levels of engagement. And finally, having the required resources to perform the job and being recognized and rewarded for one's accomplishments all contribute to employee engagement. So you can see how theories that apply to motivation can also apply to employee engagement. And research is quickly building that shows that engagement is one of the primary predictors of employee performance and intentions to remain with the organization for a long time. So, just like there are different ways to conceptualize job satisfaction, there are also different definitions of organizational commitment. So, for example, some people wonder, is organizational commitment an attitude, a behavior, or both? Well, previously, organizational commitment also referred to as company loyalty, was associated with an acceptance of the organization's goals and values, also a willingness to exert effort on behalf of the organization, and a desire to remain with the organization. So this definition encompasses both attitudes and behaviors. More recently, though, the concept of organizational commitment has been broken down into specific facets. So, affective commitment refers to an employee's emotional attachment to the organization and a sense of pride about working for the organization. In other words, you are committed to the organization because you want to be there. Continuance commitment refers to commitment to continue with the organization because there are costs associated with leaving that you want to avoid. In other words, you're committed because you need your job, not because you want it. So that's continuance commitment. Now, normative commitment refers to a sense of duty or obligation to stay with the organization. In other words, you're committed because you feel guilty for the thought of even leaving, or you feel that remaining with the organization is an important expectation of you. So, as you can imagine, affective commitment is the most powerful type of commitment for impacting employee performance and morale. Because with continuance and normative commitment, they're probably just going to do the bare minimum of what's expected. But with affective commitment, it can lead to things like organizational citizenship behaviors or going above and beyond the call of duty. So now let's move our focus to organizational citizenship behaviors. Whereas the concept of organizational commitment deals with worker or employee attitudes, such as those that I just described, the concept of organizational citizenship behaviors, or OCBs, refers to commitment related behaviors, typically stemming from affective commitment or a sense of pride in working for the organization. So OCBs are focused on employee behaviors that benefit the organization, and these really consist of efforts by employees to advance or promote their organization, its image, or its goals. So job satisfaction as well as other motivating job characteristics such as jobs that have a high degree of autonomy or meaningful work, those types of jobs tend to increase organizational citizenship behaviors. Also, there's certain personality types, like those who are agreeable and conscientiousness, that tend to perform more organizational citizenship behaviors. So it's not just the work environment, it's the person as well. So organizational citizenship behaviors are positively correlated with both job satisfaction and organizational commitment. Also, employees who engage in more organizational citizenship behaviors are less likely to miss work or quit their jobs than employees who do not engage in organizational citizenship behaviors. Research suggests that employees who go the extra mile and exhibit these organizational citizenship behaviors that you see on the slide, these employees tend to have work groups and organizations that are more productive and produce higher quality work than work groups with employees who have low levels of organizational citizenship behaviors. So there are many different types of organizational citizenship behaviors, or OCBs. These include helping behavior, sportsmanship, organizational loyalty, organizational compliance, individual initiative, civic virtue, and self-development. So you can take a look at the slide to see a description of all the different types of organizational citizenship behaviors and see if you find yourself performing those in the workplace. If so, you are probably viewed as an exceptional employee.